Good evening. Thank you all for coming. My name is Gina Duvernay, and I'm the Adult Services Manager for Gwinnett County Public Library. Tonight, we have partnered with Karis Books, and they're out of Decatur, and we're so happy to partner with them any chance we get. So if you are able, please support this beloved independent bookstore, as well as tonight's authors. Moderating tonight's talk is Janelle M. Williams, and she received a BA from Howard University and an MFA in creative writing from Manhattanville College. She was the recipient of Prairie Schooner's Lawrence Foundation Award for her short story, From the Closest Waffle House. Definitely have to read that. Janelle is currently the Director of Programs and Outreach at Writopia Lab, and Gone Like Yesterday is her debut novel, which you can find at the table there from Karis Books. And our featured author for the night is Radha Lin Chaddah, and she was born in London to an East Indian father and a Malaysian Chinese mother. She grew up in Kenya, the UK, and the US, majoring in biology at the University of Chicago. She earned medical and law degrees at the University of Illinois and a Master of Public Health at Harvard University. Radha also worked as a primary care physician in New York and Beijing, worked with the China CDC to co-write the book HIV/AIDS Beyond the Numbers, and has provided mental health care to patients in several states as a telemedicine doctor. Let's please give them a round of applause.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming out. Thank you to Gwinnett Public Library. Thank you, Gina and Karis Books, for being here. And of course, thank you, Radha Lin Chaddah, for writing such a wonderful book. I really don't even know where to start with the lovely things that I read. Vivid descriptions, characters that you can both identify and empathize with, lyrical prose, poignant and precise context. There's just so much, but I want to jump right into the depth of the book, because immediately within the first few chapters, we know that it's going to touch on some really big topics. Let's see, it starts, the first few chapters, we begin to see the spread of capitalism and how it impacts a community's economic collectivity. We're introduced to a young bride who is questioning the meaning of love, all while growing up in an instant, leaving home, losing a certain innocence and naivety, finding her way in a marriage that's lacking in romance. We meet a neurodivergent boy who is feared and misunderstood by the community around him. What inspired you to write this story? Did you go into it knowing that you would navigate so many hot topics?
Okay, great. I don't think I need that. I think I'm fully mic'd. I want to start by thanking you for coming out, and thank you to Gina for organizing this, and Karis Books. Thank you so much. So, I think in terms of why did I write the book, or how did I come to write the book, I think it's good to just step back and give you a little bit of the background of my experience of actually living in China. So my background is I have training as a physician and as a lawyer, and I ended up practicing medicine in New York City for several years before my husband had the opportunity through his job to go and live first in Taipei, and then eventually we lived in Shanghai and in Beijing. And when we moved to Asia, we thought we were going to live there for about 16 months. And didn't expect to be there for 9.5 years. So, 9.5 years later, 3 cities, not one city later, I had collected quite a lot of different experiences that left me wanting to write about my time in Asia, not necessarily a fiction book. I was a nonfiction writer. I was seeing patients at an international hospital. I worked with the China CDC on a book about the HIV/AIDS epidemic. But when I came to, our time in China was drawing to an end, I knew I wanted to write something about my time there. And that was when I realized, I don't think nonfiction is going to capture everything I feel or everything that I wanted to put in the book. And it was kind of my experiences in Asia, specifically in China, that led me to want to write this book.
I love that. That's so interesting. And in addition to that, I wanted to ask you, because I'm understanding now how your experiences shaped your desire to write the novel, but I'm also wondering, considering that the novel is really taking place from the end of the 70s until 2000, it's interesting that the topics that it's exploring, the things that are happening with the characters, are things that we're really seeing play out right now on the news. And so I'm also wondering, did what's happening in the world today impact your story? Were you writing this and also looking up on your TV screen? And in what way did what's happening in the now affect the process of writing this book?
I think that's a great question. I wish, maybe I would be like, oh yes, I kind of knew this was going to come out at this time when we're dealing with issues of, migrants and immigrants and these things. But that's not truthful. I mean, really, when I wanted to write this book I finished writing in 2019. So, now we're in 2026. So it's quite a while after finishing the book that it came out. The reason I wrote about, the rural migrants in the book is because I was living in Beijing and seeing patients in the hospital at an international hospital. And several things happened. So one thing that happened was in the context of seeing patients, I learned a lot from my patients who had lived through and beyond the Cultural Revolution. And those aren't necessarily conversations that you would have just, on the street or things like that. So they were conversations that came up in the kind of sanctuary of a physician's office, and also after developing relationships with people over time. So that was one thing that greatly influenced my desire to write a book set in that time period. The other thing that happened was we lived in a very fancy building, which had a lot of like nannies and cooks and drivers. And because I had spent my early time in Taiwan learning how to speak Mandarin, I now found myself many years later in Beijing and able to speak to a lot of the people that were working in the building. And what I discovered when I was talking to those individuals was that not a single one of them was from Beijing. Every single one of them was from the rural heartland. And they had actually left their homes that were often many, different legs of journeys away from Beijing, and had migrated to the city in order to, support their families in the rural heartland. I didn't know that. I hadn't known that. And the other thing I discovered was that for many of those, primarily women, they had young children who they had not maybe seen for several years, who they had left, back at home with grandparents. So that was just, to me, I was like, oh my gosh, like, how's that? Almost like, I mean, I know that's something that's happened through time and in different, parts of the world. It wasn't that I was unaware. I just didn't realize that was happening right there in the 2000s in this kind of, burgeoning country. And yet you still had a very distinct rural migrant population in the cities. And, they didn't have all the privileges of people that were from Beijing. That was the other thing I didn't know. I didn't know that there was something called a city passport. In the book, it's referred to as a hukou. And what it means is that, if you're born in Beijing, you have it's like having a city passport. You have a Beijing hukou that allows you to register your kids in school. That allows them to get medical services. It allows you to get certain financial perks. If you're a migrant, even if you've worked in the city for years and years and years, and your children, if you happen to bring your children with you, they cannot just enroll in the public schools. And they don't get to go to the same, hospitals, or if they do, the treatment is different. And even things like getting a bank loan, the interest rate that you might get if you're a native to Beijing versus somebody who's not from Beijing can be very significantly different. So, I didn't know that was going on. I had no idea until I met these women. And I think, so those stories really influenced me way back then when I wrote the book, started the book in 2017. And now it's just so interesting and sad that the book has come out now, and we happen to literally have this issue of who gets to have what, how, who's from where, and what goes with the status of where you're from. It's still being such a big issue.
Yeah, definitely. I want to go a little bit deeper into migrant bodies, because the way that you've written them in the novel is really powerful. There's a passage that really moved me, and I just want to read a few lines from it. different in shape and size, some pretty, some homely, young, old, bent over, straight back. Each one was waiting for her share of what the city offered her. All these migrant bodies were given in their totality in exchange for some small ration. I mean, I think that was a part that I had to read multiple times because just the way in which the description blends with the depth of what's happening with them, the mixture of the physical body and the spiritual, emotional. And there are lots of lines throughout that are like that are really beautiful, well thought out, detailing migration and how migrants were treated in Shanghai and beyond. And so considering your background, a daughter of immigrants, and having migrated yourself, how important was it for you to do this story of migrants' justice?
Yeah, I love that question. So I came to this country when I was 9. My father, he's passed away, was Indian, from East India, and my mother is Chinese, but grew up in Malaysia. And I remember when we came to this country, like I said, I was 9 years old, and my parents, my dad in particular, this was a running commentary in my home. My dad would say, what's your plan? What's your plan? What's your plan? I was 9 years old. I didn't have much of a plan, but my father really, impressed upon me the importance of having a plan and kind of making it in this country. And a story that I've shared widely, I remember coming home from high school. I was 12 years old, and I had had an amazing experience in an English class. And I came home and I said to my dad very proudly, I said, "Dad, I have a plan." And he said, "Great." He's like, "Good, what is it?" And I said, "Oh, I've decided to become a historical fiction writer." And he looked at me. No. He's like, "That is not the plan." He's like, "You don't understand. We're immigrants to this country. That is not your plan." He's like, "Your plan is you can either go to medical school or you can go to law school. Those are your choices." So I did both. So I ended up doing both, in another set of circumstances. But, that sort of, I grew up and my parents were very interested and invested in me assimilating. They wanted us to make it in this country. They wanted us to fit into this society. There was always this kind of like, your English has to be perfect. Just everything was about assimilating. And, so I've always been interested in that idea of like, but who would I have been if I had grown up, in India or in Kenya, where my dad was actually like living, and I actually lived in Kenya for 3 years when I was a child. Or what if I had lived in Malaysia and grown up where my mom had grown up? Like how different of an experience would that have been? So it was interesting all these years later to learn about these rural migrant women who were having, they may as well have been moving to a different country because of the way they were experiencing the city, the same city that I was a visitor to and had just a different level of access than they did. And they're citizens of the country. So I think that's always been interesting to me. That's always been like, who are we when we cross over? The idea of diaspora, how does that manifest in how, people perceive us and how we perceive ourselves? That's always been a super interesting topic because of my own personal history, but then also because of my lived experience.
I love that question. Who are we as a diaspora? And that question, I think, is so perfect for your novel because you really focused on this larger we. There are so many different characters. It shifts in and out of perspectives. And there are, of course, the main characters, but I was so impressed by your ability to sort of go in and out of these characters that maybe we just got for a scene or two. There's a blind prophet, a searching teacher, a bus driver who, while en route, nearly hits a woman. What was your intention by giving us such a myriad of internal monologues? And how did you choose whose point of view was most important at any specific time?
So, when I wanted to write this book, this is how it went. I had had the privilege of living in Asia for 9.5 years, in China specifically for, 7+ years. And I was very struck when I left to move to Asia, first to Taiwan and then to China. I was very struck at how people were using all kinds of interesting words to describe the fact that we were going to do this. "You're so brave," or, "Oh my goodness, really? You're going to do that? Oh, I don't think I could ever do that. I mean, wow, you're really putting yourself out there." It was almost like I was going to yeah, I don't know, like another planet. Like that's how kind of people perceived it, right? And I was very struck living abroad that entire time. You know, I met so many different people. I worked in different contexts in different hospital settings. You know, I studied Chinese, so I was there with like, you know, students at a university. I worked with the China CDC. I had all of these different experiences of Asia. Specifically, I'm going to focus on China. And I kept thinking, how could I possibly explain to people what the Chinese people who I met were like, right? Like we have this idea from reading newspaper articles, we have all of these ideas about what people are like. My experience was, you know, I'm very much a one-on-one person. I'm a physician. I mean, I sit one-on-one. I engage in those conversations all the time. So when I was writing the book, I wanted you to feel like you knew these people. Like I wanted you to understand, I wanted my reader to walk away saying, I might never go to China, I might never have been there, but I completely can relate to XYZ character in this book. And so that's why there's so many of them, because that's kind of how we live our lives, right? Our lives, we have the main characters in our lives. That might be your partner, your kids, you know, maybe it's your boss. I hope not too much, you know, but, you know, we all have our main characters, but then we have all of these supporting characters that give texture to our lives. To, you know, if somebody comes up to any one of us and says, tell me about Americans. That happens a lot when you live abroad. People are like, tell me about Americans, explain Americans to me. And I'm like, how do I even start? That's like, America's, you know, there's so many aspects of like America. So in the same way, I wanted to take this little slice of time and place and give you a very textured feeling about the community that populates the pages.
I think you really achieved that goal. I don't know how you did it, because I did wonder how you were able to gain such insight into so many different characters, but it definitely comes across, and it definitely does add that texture to it. And I think it gives it a level of context that we wouldn't have gotten had you just stuck with maybe just the two, you know, Lee and Lulu. But I'm also wondering, were any of the characters particularly hard to write or to sit with? Some of them were a little bit harder to read just in their actions. I think that they were so, particularly for me, Bo, but he was so powerful on the page to read, and I found myself wondering, well, what was he like to write? And so just in general, were there particular characters that were easier to write than others?
So when I was writing it, I didn't find any of the characters more or less challenging. But I will say that the ones that ended up in the end being challenging in different ways, you know, I'm a physician. I've spent the last several years of my practice doing nothing but mental health care. I've always been a strong advocate of mental health, fighting stigma around mental health. When I worked with the China CDC, one of the chapters that I wrote for their book was all about the stigma around the HIV/AIDS positive status. So I'm a big kind of advocate for destigmatizing, you know, disease states in general. And so I think for me, in my book, there are characters that are struggling with mental health issues. There's a character who's neurodivergent. And I think writing them and feeling like I wasn't just giving kind of a clinical description, but actually getting into their kind of outlook, that I did find challenging. Maybe because I'm a physician and I'm so sensitive to it, I really felt like, okay, I need to do this right. And that really came out, that process involved a sensitivity reader. You're right. So I kind of, my first draft, not my first draft, my book had been edited several times and we were ready to go to print. And then there was kind of a decision that we should have a sensitivity reader read the book. The sensitivity reader was hired to read the book for issues of Chinese culture and language. And then there's a sex worker in my book. And so they also wanted to make sure that that was represented in a way that was, you know, appropriate. My publishers told me, we are not concerned. This is just a formality. We just want to be able to say, essentially to say, hey, we did this. Like we were sensitive to this and we got somebody to take a look at this. And what I wasn't expecting when the sensitivity read came back, those issues, there were very few to almost no issues with those aspects that the sensitivity reader had been asked to comment on. The part that the sensitivity reader had issue with were the portrayals of mental health in the book. Now, the sensitivity reader did not know I was a physician, did not know that I practiced mental health, and did not know where, my stance on it. So it was interesting to get the feedback from the sensitivity reader about something that they had not even been asked to opine about. And so, I'd like to say that I took it all really well. I took most of the editing process really well. I think that was the most challenging part for me because it's so important to me. And so, it took me a little while, but after about 2-3 days of sitting in with it and with some, encouragement from my husband to kind of step back, I realized, okay, let me reapproach those characters. Let me give them more space on the page, which was what was really being asked for by the sensitivity reader. It was kind of a challenge. Like, the book has a lot of characters in it. And some characters only have a few pages in the book, right? Like that's all you get of them. And so this person was challenging me to say, why don't these characters get more pages in the book? And maybe that was me having to confront, well, did I feel like I was doing them justice? Right? To write more of them is to be like, to ask you to have more kind of like to go into their head more and to feel like you're doing that right. And so, but I did. I went back and, you've read the results.
I love that. That is so interesting. And I think, I really did, in terms of the mental health throughout the book, I really did wonder about the characters and what that writing process was like for you. So I'm glad that you were able to explain that. Love that. I'm going to shift a little bit. Homecoming is a big part of this narrative, as it's not particularly easy for the migrants, and you just mentioned that, to find their way home. And there's the story of one of the main characters, Lee, tells her daughter about an uncle migrated to America and whose job as a healer or bone keeper is to make sure the migrants who died afar's bones were polished, prayed over, and returned to their ancestral homes in order to put their souls at rest. And I should also note that I really love the title of this book, And the Ancestors Sing. It's just really beautiful, and it's something that I was considering while I was reading the book. Will you speak to how important ancestral history plays a part in the novel, and why is the idea of homecoming so important to the characters and thus the story as a whole?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I went to China, I kind of went there, and there was a lot of, there's this idea of ancestral worship, right, as something that is part of the culture. And when I was there, I felt like I really got a good education in the idea of it not being ancestor worship. Ancestral worship is really the wrong term. It's really ancestor reverence. It's the idea of not blindly worshiping, but actually revering. And so with reverence comes this notion of wisdom and legacy and inheritance. There's so much that goes into that idea of reverence. And what I really love, I feel like in this country, we often talk about the ancestors being behind us, or we talk about ourselves standing on the shoulders of those who came before us. And I think in China, there's a different, more kind of present day experience, which is like, that is all true, that ancestors are behind us, we stand on their shoulders, but there is the idea that they are beside us in real time, that they are available to us in real time to inform kind of our decisions. They care about what's going on with us right now. And I love that idea. I love that idea because I think, we live in a world where I feel people feel very comfortable defining other people. People feel very comfortable telling other people where they come from and who they are and where they belong. And I love the idea that no. There's a whole legion of people, ancestrals, people who are invested in you, who know exactly where you come from and who you are. And that each of us can lean on that we are with purpose and that we belong somewhere, like not defined by other people who want to define it for us, but defined by each of us has a very rich heritage. So I wanted that to be in the book. And the people in the book, home is a physical symbol of that idea. But as you know, it's much more expansive than that in the end. Yes.
Yeah, I love that you're kind of describing this as like the ancestrals just having this swarming presence, which you have that in the book. And I mean, there's just so many layers to this book. And so you definitely have all of these different characters, and they're creating this space and providing this context and understanding of the world. And then, like you said, you have the ancestors here. But then also I feel like maybe the third, there are probably other things, but the third thing I'm thinking about right now is the scene, the space, the landscape, and that was so rich in your novel as well. Come back to my question about the descriptions. I want to mention many of the chapters vividly set the scene before you dive into the plot. I recall the utilitarian description of migrant workers as hooks. I love that one. And the image of ancestors swarming Earth Mama, much like summer flies. What are the deeper meanings behind these descriptions? And how does the setting, whether of the country town of Delong or of the city of Shanghai, contribute to the story in a larger way?
Well, I think, again, it's that idea of, I mean, I don't want to give it away, but, the characters, every character in this book takes a journey. Every character in the book, both, physically and emotionally, takes a journey. And I think it's this idea of, where do we think we're going? What do we think we're leaving behind? And I wanted to kind of depict the different landscapes and the different settings as well as I could, because I think there's a lot that we often miss about our setting that we don't often necessarily pick up. And I wanted the characters to really, I wanted the land and the setting to be a character, for you to realize that they themselves, that the setting itself has kind of a personality and has a power and a movement to it that really influences ultimately the characters and even maybe their journeys, right? Like, it's more than just kind of like it's a place that you put your head down. It has much more impact upon us, and so that's why the settings are described with such detail, because I feel like the details do matter in the end to the characters' journeys. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely does. And so, it's interesting to hear you talk about it. And I couldn't, though, as I was reading it, before reading it, my initial thought in terms of like books that it might be like, I thought maybe like Pachinko, I thought Homegoing. But as I was reading it, it really is its very own unique way of writing and storytelling. And maybe that is because you have such a unique, you have a very different relationship with writing than I do. I went to an MFA, and I feel like so many things have been like, drilled into my mind about like how to be a writer. And I feel like you took so many risks with the way that you wrote this story, and I think it really paid off. And so I'm just wondering, in terms of like your influences, whether that be authors or books or shows, movies, plays, what are you looking at in terms of like, doesn't have to be like what you strive to be like, but something that has moved you?
Right. So I think the answer to that is multifactorial. I think it's really funny that you talked about risk. So let me tell you something. When I decided to write this book, I sat down, it was 2017, and I thought, oh, I have not taken a creative writing class in, I'm not going to tell you how many decades, but it was more than 2. And I thought to myself, how am I going to write a fiction book? I had been writing nonfiction. And so I'd been writing nonfiction, so I didn't really know. I knew all the things that I love to read. I read copiously. I knew that I like to watch movies, and I'm always like, why does that scene work? Why does this scene not work? But when I decided to write a fiction book, I thought to myself, okay, I have not done this before, but I'm going to lean on the fact that I went to law school. Now, you might say to yourself, law school, what does that have to do with writing a fiction novel? Well, people think of legal writing as incredibly dry. And, it can be. But this is what I would argue. I would argue that legal writing is a form of persuasive writing. When you're writing a legal brief, you're basically writing a fact pattern or the narrative, and you're writing it in a way that you want the person on the other side to see the narrative the way that you are depicting it. It's really a form of persuasive writing. And so when I decided to write this book, that's kind of what I thought of it as. I was like, oh, this is like it's like persuasive writing, but you get to use all these other, you know, colorful elements that you might not be able to put in a legal brief. And so when I started writing this book, I started with 3x5 note cards. I had my characters, and then I started outlining, which is something that I got from law school. And I ended up with a 43-page single-spaced outline before I ever started writing this book. And that took me 8.5 months to create. And then I started writing the book. So it's really interesting because you say like risks. I felt like I took no risks because I felt like by the end I had this like outline and I was like, okay, I'm good to go.
Wow, 43-page. I'm not only impressed, but a little jealous by that as someone who has like never written an outline. But I'm wondering now. You said that you started and the Ancestors Sing in 2019.
In 2017.
2017. And now I'm sure you're working on something new, thinking about something new, writing
Yes.
another 43-page outline.
Literally just starting to outline. So I do have an outline. It's only at about 10 pages right now. So, you know I have a long way to go, but yes, I've started.
Can you tell us what that might be about, or?
It's about diaspora. Again, it's about the diaspora experience, but I think it's a little closer to home, meaning closer to the U.S. And sort of exploring, you know, some aspects of identity, kind of stateside.
Oh, interesting.
And more contemporary, maybe.
And what does the writing process look like you in terms of, I mean, because are you still practicing? You're still a physician.
I stopped practicing last year. So this has been so last year I officially stopped seeing patients a year ago, a little bit over a year ago at this point. And so I'm kind of, you know, beginning, you know, a book coming out, that's quite an experience. That's a lot more work than I ever realized. But in the midst of it, I'm realizing I'm reading more. Again, I've picked my reading pace back up. I think while the book was going through its editing process, I didn't read nearly as much as I usually like to do. So once I start reading, then I started thinking. So that's my process. My process is reading. Reading motivates me to like, I start thinking of like, oh, that's an interesting character. This is how I would have twisted it, or this is what I might have done, or wouldn't it be fun if this character did this? Yeah.
Well, speaking of reading, you mentioned that you might read from your novel.
That would be great.
We would love to hear from it.
Okay, yeah, I'd love to read. It won't be long. I'm going to just read the first. I'm going to start at the beginning because the book just came out, so I'm guessing that many of you have not read the book, and so I think it's safe to say we can start at the very beginning. Okay, so And the Ancestors Sing, Part 1, Dalong Village, China, 1978. Chapter 1, Hooks. It is a place of staggering beauty, this spot tucked away in the middle of nowhere at the heart of the Middle Kingdom. The land is rich with the darkest of soil, and, at the right time of year, the hills are thickly carpeted with greenery so bold that the land seems to cry with life. However, for the men and women who dot this landscape with their hard-fought lives, knowledge of the land's capriciousness in delivering good fortune renders the image less vibrant. In between the fields outlined by irrigation canals furrowed by hand, wooden shacks protrude from the land. They lean this way and that, lacking any sense of fortitude. Not one stands straight. When heavy rains flood the fields, the people of this land dare not complain that their leaky roofs leave them drenched to the bone. They humbly accept that these meekest of shelters, while unable to keep them dry, allow them to stay put, sparing the mud beneath them from softening to silt that might carry them away. The walls bear hooks that serve to pin all that these families own, collections of pots and hose, plastic bags filled with roughly folded clothes and worn slippers, quilted coats and sacks of rice, to their place on the land. Without these rains, life would be lost. The tiny rice seedlings, each one transplanted by hand to its spot in a row of these carefully tilled fields, would be lost. The children of the land are not told stories of mythical monsters. Rather, they are regaled with the horrors of a famine that once stripped this land bare. Their nightmares are filled with the howl of empty bellies, and their daydreams soaked with abundant rains that fall as rice grains into an eternally filled bowl. Squinting to avoid the glare of a brilliant harvest sun, if one focused on the dark dots scattered on the fields, one would come upon Feng Lei, bent over at the waist and knee-deep in water cold enough to leave her feet numb. She is surrounded by others, similarly disposed, human hooks stuck in the soft earth. Hurry up, cut faster, Feng Bo spat as he talked to his young wife. Get your stems tied up quickly. I want to catch up with the others. I will not wait for you. Thank you.
There was that line about hooks, and just in general, such beautiful introduction to your novel. So thank you so much for reading. I think we have time for questions now.
Thank you. I found your story very amazing, and I have a quite an experience that resonate yours, but it's kind of opposite. I grew up in China. I left when I was 19, and I lived in Kenya for a year and a half before I came to the United States. Yeah, so it's kind of yeah. And I completed my undergrad and my graduate degree here in the United States as an international student, working in IT for 7 years, and then I got my green card. I went back to China to Chengdu University of Traditional Chinese Medicine.
Oh, wonderful.
So now I'm a practitioner. My major was integrative medicine. So, I kind of resonate with your story.
I love
Yeah. And the question is, what was the time that you were living in China for the 7.5 years?
Sure. So I first went to Taipei in 2008 and was there for about 16 months, and then came to Shanghai and was there for almost 2 years, and then was in Beijing from 2011 to 2017. And so that was the period of time. Yeah, so it was each part had amazing things. Never expected to be there that long, but had an amazing experience being there and thoroughly enjoyed it. So yeah, that was the time frame. I love your story. I love that.
Any other questions?
Yes. Your book is your novel is a novel. It's not a fiction. It's not fiction.
It's fiction.
It's a fiction.
It's a fiction.
So you make this story
Yes.
according to your experience in China.
It is heavily influenced by the people that I met and the experiences I had and the stories I heard, but it is completely fiction. It is a fictional story. And I also bring a lot of things that aren't necessarily about China. I practiced medicine for many years before going to China. There are aspects of that are in this book. But yes, it is completely fiction.
You have some models of these characters in your book.
I would say every character in this book is based on several people who I've met, know very well, in the context of either professionally or personally.
Yeah.
I think they feel real because they are derived from lots of people that I've known over the years. Is that a fair way to put it? Yes. So, none of these characters exists out in the world. They are not just, somebody I met who I gave a different name for the book. No, it's completely fiction. But they are an amalgamation of many different characters and people that I've known.
According to just now, you told us your experience. You live in Taipei, Shanghai, and Beijing.
Yes.
So from the south, east, north. So how about your story is happen in those big cities like Taipei, Shanghai, Beijing, those amazing, very successful cities in the world now. your stories come from those kind of village or big city?
Both. So the story is about, at the heart of this book, the story is about 3 women who migrate from rural China to Shanghai.
Oh.
They all go for different reasons. Well, they all have different circumstances that lead them to have to make that migration.
Migrant workers.
Migrant workers. But the question for all of them is they go in order to, ensure the survival of their families. And the question is, what is their experience like? Will they be successful? And will they make it home again? And if they do, what does that look like? Right? What does it look like even if they make it home?
Once upon a time, I was one of them.
Yes.
That is 40 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, 35 years ago. So I moved from my hometown, Chongqing, is western of China, to one of the prosperous city, Shenzhen, cross border with Hong Kong.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
So that is the new city after China opened the door
Yeah.
in 1980.
Yeah.
So I'm very interested, even now, until now, I haven't read this book, but I'm very interested to read this book after this section.
Oh, I'm honored. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you,
so
very
much.
appreciate
No,
it.
thank you.
So, because those I can see in China, actually, in last 40 years, we have over 100 million, probably, I think 500 million people like me, like your character.
Yeah, it's the largest.
500 million.
It's the largest human migration in human history. And it continues to this day. I mean, it's still a phenomenon. Yeah.
Yeah, but in China, we have those kind of books. But in the world, in English language world, we never seen this kind of book. But this is a huge population. So they have different interesting story. So I'm very glad that you reveal those kind of part to the world. That's great.
That was, well, thank you for saying that. I mean, listen, I really appreciate you saying that, because for me, I had the privilege of living in China. I had the privilege of meeting so many different people when I lived there. And I really just realized that I know that this story is written about in China. Of course it's written about in China. How could it not be? And but for me, I just wanted to be able to share some of this experience with people in this part of the world who might not know this story or not know it as much, like who might not be as familiar with it as a phenomenon. And so that's kind of what motivated me to write it as well.
Yeah, have the Chinese version? Not yet.
No.
So I suggest you translate it in Chinese, then go back to China. Let the China 500 million people and their relatives to read this book from the outside world. Let them to open their eyes to see how about the world vision, to see what happened in last 40 years in China.
Yeah.
They only read by themselves, read the authors and the writers by themselves, but they never see from the objective point of view to see. So I think that's meaningful. If you like, I would like to introduce this book to my friends in there. I have over 1,000 of the relatives and friends who want to know that part. Especially, I say younger generation. They even don't know what happened in the last 40 years. My son and my daughter, they live in China. They don't know what happened because that's.
I think you need to take him on the road.
I
I think so. But then you have a question?
Yeah.
Quick one.
Yeah.
So you lived in Beijing for a number of years. Can you just say a little bit about some of the experiences that you had in Beijing, living in Beijing, or working at the China CDC and visiting Anhui province? Just say something about those experiences that informed your decision to write this book.
Okay, I'm just going to share very quickly 2 stories that I think were very influential. So it goes to kind of what you were saying. These stories don't appear in this book, but they really influenced me. So the first one was I became very close with a housekeeper who worked in our building. Very, very close to her. We could only speak Chinese with each other, and we became friends. And after a year of friendship, it was the kind of friendship where she told me about her kids back in Anhui province. She told me, what she was hoping for them, her dreams for them. And she even shared, we were at the level of friendship where she told me what she liked about her husband, what she didn't like about her husband, all the things that friends talk about. And one day she comes to me after about a year of knowing each other, and she looked very tense and very scared. And she said, I have to tell you something, but I don't know. I'm worried that you're going to think very badly about me after I tell you this story. And I couldn't imagine what that would be. And she said, the son I've been telling you about who's in Anhui, she said, what I haven't told you is that he's sick. So I didn't know why that would be a problem because I'm a doctor. So, I didn't understand why she was worried or scared to tell me that. And she starts crying and she says, no, you don't understand. He's sick he has a sickness of the head. And she goes, and I don't know, but I don't think it's my fault. And she's just crying now. And that really, that stigma, that issue of stigma, and the fact that, we were close and she didn't feel like she could tell me that. She was so scared to tell me that. And I'm a physician, and she was scared to tell me that. So that was the first thing that really struck me. And then, she told me that the only reason she told me this story was because she wanted me to come to Anhui province with her, to travel from Beijing to Anhui. And she wanted me to travel there to go and meet her son's doctors. It turned out her son was institutionalized in a psychiatric hospital, and she wanted me to go back to Anhui province and meet her son's doctors. And I said to her, I cannot do that. I said, I can't do that. I was worried that would be really not good for her son, that could be perceived as some American doctor coming in there and trying. I mean, her son had been hospitalized for some time. And I explained all of that to her. I said, that could be seen as really rude. It could be seen as like, I'm an American doctor and I think I can come and tell, some set of doctors who've been treating your son for some amount of time. I was worried that would not go over well. And so she said to me very clearly, she said, listen, she said, you don't understand. If you just come with me to Anhui province, she's like, you're an American doctor. If you just come with me and the doctors there know that my son knows an American doctor, that's going to change his care. That's going to change the kind of care he gets. And I didn't want to believe that. So I did. I traveled with her to Anhui province. I mean, part of, going there was I'm looking at everything. I mean, you talk about the scenes in the book. And it was a lovely experience. I got to meet her mother. I went to her hometown, her rural village. And all of that was amazing. The entire time I was very concerned about going to the psychiatric hospital because I just thought, this is not going to go well. And so I said to her before we got there, I said, listen, I'm going to go with you. We're going to go in. This is going to be a 10-minute visit. I'm going to be very polite. I'm going to say hello, and that's it. And then we're going to leave. And she said, okay. So we go in there, and, well, shame on me, because that's not at all what happened. I went there. The Chinese doctors, they brought me to the lounge. They had made a full meal for me. They had cooked a meal for me. We ate lunch together. And then, just like doctors do all over the world, they started bringing me case files, patient files, and they just wanted to talk about them. They wanted to talk about the different patients. They wanted to talk about, is this the medicine you would have prescribed? In America, what would you do if you had a patient that had this kind of course, just like we do here, like with our colleagues, right? I don't know if there are any doctors in the room, but I know, that's what you do, just kind of exchanging professional kind of ideas. And it was actually an amazing experience. But that was one of the experiences that really influenced my wanting to write certain storylines into the book. Again, that story is not in the book, but it's a story that was influenced my thoughts about, people ask, why do you want to have people with mental health issues in the book? That's why, right? That's why, because of that element of stigma that was so strong that somebody who I cared about so deeply was scared to tell me that her son had a mental illness. Yeah. Thank you for that question.
Did you say you had 2 stories? Was there another one?
Oh, the other story, and this will be the last one because I know we're tight on time. I worked with the China CDC while I was in Beijing. I had the opportunity to work for the China CDC. They were putting out a public health, English language public health book about the HIV/AIDS epidemic. Specifically, kind of, it's one of the public health campaigns that the China CDC was very proud of, kind of the way that they were able to, deal with the blossoming HIV epidemic that came up in the 80s in China. And it was a very interesting experience because if you had asked in the 1980s, what are officials doing to deal with the sex work industry as being a contributing factor to the blossoming HIV/AIDS epidemic, the answer would have been, we don't have a sex work industry. Right? There would have been absolute well, no, that's not part of the problem because we don't have that. Now, why do they not have it? Because it's against the law. So no official is going to admit that in their jurisdiction there are sex workers. So here I am in the 2000s, and I had access to 57 transcripts of interviews that had been conducted by public health workers and sex workers from the 1980s. Right? So even though the official, kind of statement was like, we don't have sex workers, of course they had sex workers. And so it was interesting. That was another kind of experience that I had that I was like, oh, okay, this population that was kind of denied, the existence of this population that was kind of officially denied. I guess that's it. I'm like, oh no, let's put you in the book too. Yes, yes.
Wow. Beginning to understand just where you got all of the depth, the richness, your experience is what you've pulled from so many different places, and that all comes through so lovely in the book.
Thank you. Thanks, Janelle.
Thank you again for writing this book. Thank you for sitting with us. Thank you for your beautiful explanations and just, coming to the Atlanta area.
Yes, thank you.
And
Thank you so much. I've
been
enjoyed
so
it.
lucky to have you.
Yes.